What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Zekko football channel. Manchester United are in turmoil. After losing to Bayern Munich in the Champions League and Brighton at home, they have only won 2 out of their last 6 games. Defensively, they're an absolute shambles, and that's what we're turning our attention to today. Today, we're having a look at Manchester United's defence and doing our very best to try and fix them, if they can be fixed. If you're new to the channel, please make sure you subscribe, you like the video, and turn on those notifications. And now let's try to fix Man United's appalling defence. Before we are able to try and fix anything, we need to find out what's wrong. So we're going to go through the games that Man United have played. They've actually played 6 and lost 4 of them. Terrible, terrible run. But if we start at the Wolverhampton Wanderers game and take a look at their average positions, what we can see is just generally the way they set up. But what the main issue was for in this Wolves game was a lack of blocking away passing lanes. They were driven through far too easily, and it just meant that Wolves were able to get on the transition on the counter time after time again. This is an effect that was repeated in the Bayern Munich match. But in particular, I want to focus on Mason Mount and Bruno Fernandes because of how narrow they were. They're essentially playing the same position in this point, and this meant that the pockets of space between Alejandro Garnacho and Mason Mount and vice versa, Anthony and Bruno Fernandes, was so great that they weren't able to get across. This allowed Wolves to drive through the heart of midfield, and in the Bayern game allowed for passing lanes through the midfield as well. Casemiro had far too much to do and was not able to cover the ground to be able to get to the different players that were attacking him. This meant that he needed to dive into challenges. He needed to try and stop the rot, and he couldn't do. This meant that the back four were completely isolated, and it also made sure that Manchester United were continuously on the back foot. If we fast forward and have a look at the Tottenham Hotspur game, there are different issues showcased in these matches. The second one is Manchester United wanted to be a little bit more attacking. They were actually very good in the first half, but it was the second half that Spurs really started to ramp it up. Luke Shaw out here driving forwards. This is one of the major points and the positive points of Manchester United's play last season. Luke Shaw bombing on and Lisandro Martinez dropping a little bit deeper but coming over to cover for Luke Shaw's absence. But what ended up happening is that Lisandro Martinez wasn't able to cover the amount of space. This left an acre of space for the likes of Kulusevski, for the likes of James Maddison to drop into and then start switching play. The possession-based play that Spurs had really hurt Manchester United, and you had them playing the balls through the back line, and it meant that the midfield trio of Casemiro, Bruno Fernandes and Mason Mount weren't able to get back fast enough to be able to combat it. Erik ten Hag has seen this and then changed tacts. In the game against Nottingham Forest, he actually opted for a 2-man midfield. Casemiro and Christian Eriksen were playing as 2 central defensive midfielders, allowing Bruno Fernandes to go forwards that little bit more. And this actually is one of the better defensive games, even though they conceded 2 goals within the span of 4 minutes. They actually generally were quite good defensively apart from that. We can see that they are so incredibly narrow here and they're so compact. This is one of the main reasons why they did so well. The back four were able to push up that little bit further, and it meant that the midfield presence was almost non-existent for the opposition, suffocating them as they played the ball through midfield. The transitional play wasn't there because they had the ability to really press and make sure the turnovers happened before anything bad was able to come from it. Anthony and Rashford did a good job of coming inside to stop the runs from deep, and it allowed them to then play the ball forwards whenever they got a turnover. This didn't actually materialise in the Arsenal game, as Arsenal are just a better side than Nottingham Forest at this point, and instead Dalot needed to play on the left hand side. This was a better thing because he's stuck next to Martinez. If you remember the game against Tottenham, you remember that Shaw was bombing forwards. Dalot didn't do this, and instead he stuck behind. He managed to get forwards a little bit, but generally it was all about defending this space against Bukayo Saka. But again, another problem reared its head. Christian Eriksen was not able to get out to the midfielder, it was Declan Rice at the time, or the winger, when going forwards, and it meant that this right hand side for Arsenal, the left hand side for Manchester United, was continuously exposed. The switch of play was continuously on, and it also meant that Arsenal were able to play through the lines, through United, far too easily. Fast forwarding to the Brighton game, and the same issue rears its ugly head. We have Reguilon here, I should say, not Christian Reguilon. We have Reguilon here, who's come in for the injured Luke Shaw and Tyrone Malacia. He is now bombing on forwards and doing the same thing that Luke Shaw did. However, his position opening is something that Brighton really exploited once more. The pockets of space in behind Reguilon but on the left hand side of Lisandro Martinez just meant that the likes of Veltman or Gross or even the likes of Adingra were able to pick up the play and then just drive forwards. Danny Welbeck moved into this space more often than not as well, and it was actually the play through midfield from this area that allowed Brighton to get their first goal. This is a massive issue. The left back going forwards, but Manchester United almost are not trained enough to be able to deal with the absence of the left back when he goes forwards, and the recovery runs just are not there. Unfortunately, Reguilon does not have the defensive capabilities to be able to retreat back whenever he needs to. And then finally we can have a look at the Bayern Munich game, because the same issue seemed to happen. Immediately within this match, Leroy Sané began to run in between Reguilon and Lisandro Martinez. It's almost like Bayern did their homework and actually saw what Brighton were doing in that game previously. Leroy Sané was picking up pockets of space in between this area, and it just meant that Bayern were able to flow from that. Harry Kane was then driving in towards the byline, towards the penalty area, and it was through this space that was vacated by Reguilon that allowed Bayern to get in time after time again. And the goals actually come from the opposite sides, but the need for Manchester United to overcompensate for the space that was there just meant that the imbalance in the squad was there for everyone to see. A massive problem. Let's have a look at some in-match scenarios, because a very concerning pattern is starting to unfold with the way this Manchester United side defend. We're going to first have a look at the game against Brighton. This is actually the first goal that Brighton scored at Old Trafford. What I really want to pay attention to is, number one, the space that Joel Veltman has to be able to play the pass that he wants, or the amount of options that he has. And the second thing I want to look at is the lack of awareness that this Manchester United side have from a defensive point of view. As you can see from your image, you can see that the back three is here. Dalot is currently not in shot, but you have a good shot of the midfield four. This is the diamond that Erik ten Hag decided to play with. A more narrow-minded approach with McTominay and Eriksen in the midfield. Casemiro obviously playing as that lone central defensive midfielder. Bruno Fernandes a little bit further forwards, and then you have the two strikers. But what I really want to talk about is the lack of aggression, the lack of intensity from these three in particular. Bruno Fernandes does a decent job of pressing, albeit by himself. And at the same time, Reguilon actually makes the move to go and pressurise Joel Veltman. This is fine if it's already been worked on, but it hasn't clearly, because of the amount of pockets of space that Veltman has to pass to. He can pass to Gross, he can pass to Danny Welbeck, he can pass down the line to Adingra, and what ends up happening is playing the ball into Danny Welbeck, who can then play round Reguilon, round Martinez, and then get down the channel. This is so incredibly easy that it's pretty shambolic, to be honest with you. It's very embarrassing. And then if we move the play on to a certain extent, we can see Danny Welbeck has now received the pass. Reguilon understands what he's done now, isn't having to recover. Christian Eriksen gets over far too slow, and Casemiro has played completely out of the game. The midfield four might as well not have been there, and already they're trying to sprint back, hurry back to try and make sure that they're able to get enough bodies back. But it's just far too late. Welbeck plays the ball through into Adingra, and then at that point, it's all about blocking the cross. They fail to block the cross. Martinez comes out because Reguilon is out of position, and the ball falls to Danny Welbeck after a good leave by Adam Lallana, and the game is 1-0. So they run down the sides, cross it into the box, and get their goal. Let's have a look at another moment, because this is the pattern that is starting to unfold. If you can see it, then that's great. If you can't, I'll explain in a moment. Here is the game against Bayern Munich, the most recent match that they played. Jamal Musiala has run down the left-hand side, Bayern's left-hand side, Manchester United's right. He's got a fortunate deflection with Dalot, and he's about to play the pass. But he's about to play the pass into Serge Gnabry. Now have a look at how much space Gnabry has without being pressurised. That is criminal. Absolutely criminal. Non-league football would not see this level of space. It is horrendous. And then you see that Casemiro is currently ball watching. He's just watching this play happen. The lack of aggression, the lack of intensity to be able to view Gnabry in so much space in your own penalty area is horrendous. And then obviously the ball is played into him, he smashes it home, and it's 2-0 to Bayern Munich. Let's have a look at one extra moment, and then I'll explain what is going on. Martinelli has run down the left-hand side. This is a game against Arsenal. They lost this game by 3-1, but it's actually the first goal that I want to talk about. This is the first moment that Arsenal really have to go forwards, the first proper attempt to really attack, and Manchester United are currently actually 1-0 up in this instance. This is a goal that makes it 1-1. Martinelli is on the wing and he's about to play the pass through. Casemiro is attempting to block the ball, but he fails to do so. Martin Odegaard is in acres of space. Now, this is very, very good from Odegaard, but it's also horrendous midfield marking. Christian Eriksen has just left him to run into a centre-back slot. Now, that's fine if you believe that your centre-backs are currently out of position, which I suppose they are. That's a different issue. Diogo Dalot is currently marking Bukayo Saka, which is fine, but the amount of space that Martin Odegaard has is criminal, and obviously he slots home after a cross. Do you see the pattern that has unfolded before you? Yes. Manchester United have a terrible, terrible way of not marking the player down one of the wings and then failing to block out a cross and not having enough awareness to be able to mark a man inside or outside the box in the centre of the pitch. This has happened time after time after time again. Down the wings, crossed through into, and then failed to break down. Then you have another one. They've played down the wings, crossed into the box, and it's been slotted home. The lack of awareness of late runs into or outside the box is non-existent. It's just not there. They don't understand. There is no awareness, there is no aggression, there is no tenacity, and defensively they're an absolute shambles. This is both down to setup and also player preference and priority. And to be honest with you, there are more instances than this, and it's only going to get worse if it's not fixed. So how could you fix this? Well, I do believe there are a couple of things that Manchester United and Erik ten Hag could attempt to do to try and change their defensive frailties. This is the team that they lined up against Bayern Munich, and it's safe to say that they were torn apart in certain occasions. Reguilon going forwards was a big issue, leaving that space in behind for Sane to really attack. Lisandro Martinez's left flank meant that a lot of the time the team was having to shift across, and then their lack of awareness from the two central defensive midfielders on the players ready to come into the box on the other side as well just meant that Manchester United were having to do far too much. So how could you change it? Could you change the personnel? Is Christian Eriksen really a defensive-minded player enough to be able to stop the attacks going down this side? I don't believe he is. I like Eriksen, but I think his qualities are better suited further forward. But that's, of course, where Bruno Fernandes plays. You're not going to replace your captain, which would mean that some kind of a change of formation is needed. Could Bruno Fernandes then come up and play where Pellistri does? Well, then you're not getting the best of Fernandes in that central area. We know he works very hard, but I believe that his qualities are certainly diminished when he's out on this right-hand side. I also quite like Pellistri for his graft, his dynamism, and the fact that he managed to get back more often than not down this right-hand side when playing against Bayern Munich. So something needs to change, and one of those changes is Sofyan Amrabat coming into midfield for Christian Eriksen. I believe he'd be a far better quality player when Reguilon decides to go forward to be able to cover that space. It then wouldn't leave Martinez out of position. He'd be able to shuffle across a little bit more. His aggression in the play and his ability to stop passes through those lines would be extremely useful. But then you've still got the issue of the lack of pressing ability through the middle of midfield. Fernandes is not going to be that one-man pressing machine to be able to cut off both lanes of passing, which means that something needs to change. Mason Mount is also a player that needs to be considered, and you can't have a new player like that not being integrated into the side, especially with how badly Erik ten Hag wants him, or wanted him, I should say. So he's going to need to play. He's going to need to have some kind of influence in this side. So I've come up with this. This is something that's a little bit radical. You're going to be asking me, where is Casemiro? I've actually opted to remove him from the squad just to give him a little bit time out, a little bit of a rest. Amrabat comes in as this central defensive midfielder. Because of this, I've got now Fernandes and Mount. This is part of the play and the midfield balance that was in that Wolverhampton Wanderers game. Yes, the infamous game where they all absolutely ran through continuously. Now, it is also part of a tactical tweak. It's not just personnel. Fernandes and Mount need to sit a lot more. And to do this, they need to make sure that the entire team is moving as one. They need to all go up and down the pitch together. Time after time again, the verticality of Manchester United was always broken. They were always too far apart from each other, and it meant that too many large pockets of space were being opened up both behind and in front Bruno Fernandes and Mason Mount. This allowed Wolves to counterattack through the middle of the pitch, and it meant that Casemiro was left on an island. However, the fix to this is a radical one, yes, but one that I think that Manchester United could really do with. If you split the team into different banks, so you've got one bank of 4, Amrabat can be part of the other bank of 3, and you have 3 separate sets, obviously the defenders, the midfielders, and the strikers. What you need to do is condense this into a more cohesive and tight-knit unit. In doing this, what you're doing is essentially making sure that the passing lanes are not available. The team moves forwards and backwards as a unit, as one, and it means that Fernandes and Mount and Amrabat do not have to run as much to be able to pick up the passing lanes. And also it helps them in pressuring scenarios and situations where players might be picking up. There's less of a space for them to converge upon. This is notoriously a scenario and a solution that Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool picked up when they were at their pomp, when they were in their pomp, I should say. It's also something that Manchester City and Barcelona have previously done. If you limit the amount of space that's in midfield, you not only help yourself in turnovers, but you also make sure that you're able to play that little bit further up the pitch. This allows for transition and the transition of the 3 attackers to be able to be given the ball into these channels and go forwards. At the moment, they are far too open, they are far too wide, and it's leaving the midfielders far too much to do. Eriksen has far too much to go, and so does Casemiro to be able to cover the runs and cover the different pockets of space picked up by attackers. If you limit that and make sure that they're condensed as a unit, you limit the amount of opportunities that they have in the centre of the pitch, which is where most of the goals are coming from. They can go down the wing, that's fine, but as long as your midfield and the back 4 are coupled together and moving as one, there's less likelihood of a player being left by himself for an open goal shot. It's a radical decision and one that's going to need timing and training to do, but a real quick fire change is Amrabat in for Casemiro and bringing in Mason Mount and Bruno Fernandes as 2 workhorse-like men players to be able to block off space, block off counter-attacking opportunities, and then moving the team as one, as a unit, is something that later on down the line can really benefit Manchester United from conceding so many of these poor goals. Reguilon can still go forwards, Martinez and Amrabat can cover the space, but if they're tucked neatly together, it makes it that little bit more difficult to then transition into a more attacking phase of play. Something that I think Manchester United could seriously benefit from. They need to be more open-minded, they need to be more cohesive, and they need to be more restrictive in the way and the space that they give their opponents. Something that's not easy to teach, but it's definitely a fix for the future. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I would love to hear from you. How do you fix this Manchester United defence? Let me know. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new, and I hope to see you in the next one. But until then, take care.